This is stage 4, Jerdan Falls. Second pass, 8.32 miles this time. And still grading. Hey. Thank you. Don't get friendly lights.
Just said, lights are bright. How many?
10 or 15. 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Right 4 minus, no cut. Left 4 minus. Into crest, into right 5 plus, 50. Right 4 minus. Left 4 plus long, 70. Left 6, 70. Right 5 plus over small crest long. Into long small crest, into right 5 plus, loose over crest. Into left 5 plus, loose, long over small crest. Into right 5 plus, long, loose. Into left 6 over small crest. Into left 6 over small jump, 150. Loose into long small crest. Into left 5 minus, loose over crest. Right 6 long. Kinks 200. Right 5 minus over kick, long, go, go, go. Into left 4 plus over jump, long, 70.
Was it 4?
Left 4 plus over jump, long,
Got it,
70.
done.
Caution, right 3 plus, loose over jump. Repeat, caution, right 3 plus, loose over jump. 50. Right 6, 50. Crest, loose.
Next.
50. Left 5 minus, loose, 250. Brake, small crest, loose, 30. Left 3 plus, loose, go, 400. I saw you hesitate there. Left 6 loose, starts, loose starts. Don't lift over bridge into jump, 50. It said don't lift, go, go, go. Right 6 over small crest, loose ends, 70. Right 6 plus, long, tightens 5 minus, 70. Right 4 plus, 150. Loose into left 6 over small crest. Loose, long. Into left 5 minus. Loose, long. Opens over small crest. 150. Right 5 over small crest. 150. Left 5 loose starts. Into small jump, into right 5 plus over kick, loose ends. Right 5 plus over kick, 100. Left 6 into right 6, into small crest, into left 5, loose starts. Right 5 minus, 70. right 4 plus, into left 6 plus, crest, left 5, 120, long spoon crest, right 5 over crest, loose ends,
I hate it when you say loose ends. What you really mean is
30, left 4 plus, narrow over bridge 50,
slippy starts.
left 5 minus, over crest, down, brake 50, right 3 plus, into small crest 30, left 5 plus long 50, right 5 long over small crest 70, left 5 over small crest 200. Left 6 over small crest, slippy, crest, into right 4 plus soft. 100, right 5 minus, left 6 long, tightens 4 plus, over small crest, soft, 100, go, go, go,
I can't, Kieran.
right 6 plus, over small crest, now you can, left 6, very long, 50, small crest 250, stay right over small jump 150, go, go, go. Jump 200. Right 5 minus, over crest soft, 150. Go, go.
I can't, Kieran. Soup.
Small crest 250. Long small crest, very slippy. Into right 6 plus over crest 100. Right 5, soft, tightens 4 plus.
I'm sorry, I'm slowing down.
Small crest 100. Left 6 over small crest, tightens 5. Into small crest. Into left 6 plus, long over small crest, tightens 5 plus. Water stay mid, 120. Double caution, left 6 plus over jump into kick, stay mid. Into right 6, 250. Right 5, 350. Stay right over small crest 120. Right 5 into left 6, 150. Left 6 over crest 30. Right 5 long, 150. Small crest 50, left 6 plus over small crest. Right 6 into left 5 over crest, down, opens. into right 5.
Next.
Caution 50, left 3 plus long. Right 4 very long over kick, opens long, over small crest, over kick. Into small crest, into left 6 long, over small crest. Make that one.
Slipping.
Okay.
We're right.
Yep. 150. Right 5 plus over small crest 30. Stay left over small crest. Into right 5 plus short. Into left 4 extra long over crest 30. Caution, small jump into right 4 no cut. Into left 4 minus over small jump. Right 5 over kick 100. Caution, jump into right 3 plus deceptive. Left 4 plus over small crest. Into right 5, tightens 4 over finish 50. Crest 100. Repeat 5, tightens 4. You're done.
Jesus.
Good job.